An eight-year-old Navy SEAL stood at a grocery register, hands shaking, trying to trade his silver star for a loaf of bread. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. Then a retired military dog walked to the counter, placed both paws up, and stared at the medal like he knew exactly what it was. Subscribe. You need to see what happened next. The kind of heat that doesn't ask permission settled over Rockford like a wool blanket, soaked in exhaust fumes. It pressed down on the cracked sidewalks, on the fast food wrappers, skittering across the parking lot of Valley Discount Grocery, on the back of Marcus Webb's neck, as he pulled into the last available space in the far corner of the Pradas lot. He sat in the truck for a moment with the engine off, both hands resting on the steering wheel, doing the thing his therapist called grounding. Feel the seat, feel the heat. You are in Rockford, Illinois. You are not in Ramadi. He had been doing this for 3 years. It still felt like lying to himself. But it was better than the alternative. From the passenger seat, Bravo watched him with the calm, unreadable patience of a creature that had seen worse and survived it. The 72-pound German Shepherd had a broad, scarred muzzle, a left ear that had been notched by a piece of shrapnel outside Fallujah, not Marcus's deployment. A previous handlers and eyes the color of dark amber that missed very little. He had spent 4 years in Kandahar learning to locate things buried in the earth that wanted to kill people. Now he spent his days in a 2-bedroom apartment off Auburn Street, eating kibble and occasionally dismantling Marcus's socks. He was by any measure doing fine. Marcus was less certain about himself. He grabbed the leash off the dashboard, clipped it to Bravo's harness, and they got out together into the punishing afternoon. Marcus was 34 years old and moved like a man who had learned early that the world rewarded stillness. He was not large in the showy way, no gym-sculpted bulk, no deliberate intimidation, but he was solid and unhurried in a way that made people instinctively give him space in a crowd. His forearms were covered in faded ink. A globe, and anchor on the left, a topographic line of the Euphrates River on the right, and a date, the 14th of November, 2005, in plain block numbers, just below his elbow. He wore a grey t-shirt, dark jeans and boots that had been resoled twice. He needed ibuprofen and dark roast coffee. He had a migraine that had been drilling into the base of his skull since before dawn. A dull metronome of pain he had learned to move through rather than fight. He hated grocery stores. He hated the fluorescent lighting that turned every surface, the color of old teeth, the way shopping carts moved, with no regard for spatial awareness, the sudden shriek of a dropped jar echoing off the linoleum. Most of all, he hated the feeling of being boxed in, surrounded by people whose movements he could not predict and whose intentions he could not read. His therapist, Dr. Renata Morales, had told him 18 months ago that avoidance was not a coping strategy. He had told her that he disagreed. She had told him she was billing him regardless. He went to the grocery store. He hated it. They walked in through the automatic doors, and the cold air hit him like a door swung open, refrigerated, chemical sweet, and underlaid with the faint sour note of produce beginning to turn. Bravo's nails clicked on the linoleum with the precision of a metronome. The store was a midweek, late afternoon, the specific purgatory of a Tuesday, not crowded, not empty, just populated enough to make Marcus aware of everybody in his peripheral vision. He moved toward the pharmacy aisle, already running the route in his head. Ibuprofen, then coffee, then the express lane, then out. He did not plan to make eye contact. He did not plan to speak to anyone beyond the transaction. He had been doing well lately at keeping the circle of his life small and manageable. Then Bravo stopped. It was not the stop of a distracted dog pausing to investigate a smell on the floor. It was precise and sudden, like a fuse being cut. The shepherd's head came up, ears rotating forward with the fine-tuned focus of a satellite dish finding signal. His nostrils flared in a rapid series of micro-inhalations. His body went still in that particular way, weight-distributed muscles at ready tension that Marcus recognized from 4 years of working alongside military working dogs in theater. It was the posture that meant something here is not right. Marcus followed the dog's gaze toward the front of the store. Lane 3. There was a line. And at the head of it, at the register, something was happening that had brought the ordinary hum of the afternoon to a slow, uncomfortable halt. He was impossibly old in the way that some men become, not frail so much as reduced as if decades had slowly edited away everything non-essential until only the structural frame remained. He stood at the register in a cardigan, the color of old mustard, its elbows worn smooth, its collar turned up slightly on one side in the way of a man who dressed alone, and had no one to tell him. His slacks were dark and pressed with faded creases that suggested they had once been cared for and were now simply worn from habit. He had a cane aluminum, the cheap kind from a medical supply store, the rubber tip slightly worn on one side from the compensating lean of a man whose left knee no longer fully cooperated. His name, though Marcus did not know it yet, was Walter Briggs. He was 88 years old. He had outlived a war, a career, 3 of his 4 closest friends, and his wife of 51 years, who had died 14 months ago in the hospital bed that still occupied the corner of his living room because he had not been able to bring himself to return it. On the rubber conveyor belt in front of him sat the arithmetic of bare survival: 1 loaf of cheap white bread, 3 cans of low-sodium chicken soup, 1 jar of instant coffee, 1 roll of paper towels. The total, according to the register, display that Marcus could read, from 15 feet away, was $18.22. Walter was 18 cents short of $3. He was counting quarters. The cashier's name tag read Tyler. He was 19 years old. With the particular dead-eyed exhaustion of someone working their 3rd shift of the week, a jaw working a piece of pink gum with mechanical persistence. He had a crooked name tag and a phone screen-shaped tan line on his forearm, and he was looking past Walter Briggs with the vacant, clock-watching stare of someone whose mind had already left the building. "You're at 1540, sir," Tyler said, not unkindly but not kindly either. Just, flatly, the way you read a number off a screen. Walter's jaw moved. His hands, dotted with dark liver spots, trembled as he pushed a small pile of quarters and dimes across the black rubber counter. "That's what I have for coin," he said. His voice was a dry rasp, the vocal cords of a man who didn't speak to anyone most days. "I have the rest in paper." He reached into the pocket of his slacks and produced a worn leather billfold. He opened it. Marcus, watching from the aisle, could see from the way Walter's face changed, a micro-contraction around the eyes, a slight tightening of the jaw, that what he found inside was not what he had expected. The billfold was nearly empty. Walter stood very still for a moment, the billfold open in both hands, staring into it with the expression of a man doing rapid, unwilling arithmetic in his head and not arriving at a number he liked. Behind him, a woman in athleisure wear checked her smartwatch and exhaled through her nose. A man in a polo shirt shifted his weight and looked pointedly at the express lane sign. The low-grade social pressure of a backed-up checkout line, petty, invisible and perfectly effective, began to fill the air like humidity. Tyler popped his gum. "Sir, do you want to put something back?" Walter's chin came up slightly. A reflex. "No," he said. "I have it." He reached into the deep interior pocket of his cardigan, the kind of pocket a man keeps things in that matter, and produced a manila envelope, its edges soft with age, its flap resealed so many times that the adhesive had gone brown. He set it on the counter with both hands, carefully, and opened it. What he removed first was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery folded in thirds. The letterhead, even from Marcus's distance, was visible, the seal of the executive office of the President of the United States. Beneath it a signature, Nixon, 1971. Tyler leaned forward and squinted. "Sir, I can't. I don't know what that is." "It's a letter," Walter said. "Presidential commendation. Department of the Navy." Then he reached back into the envelope and produced a personal check, the old-fashioned kind, from a checkbook, with a carbon copy made out to Walter Briggs for $200. The date on the check was the 3rd of September 2014. Tyler took the check, turned it over, looked at the back, and set it down on the counter gently, with the practiced neutrality of someone delivering bad news to a stranger. "Sir, this check expired a long time ago. I can't process this." The silence that followed was 3 seconds long and felt considerably longer. Walter stared at the check on the counter. His hands, which had been steady while he was moving with purpose, began again, their fine, involuntary trembling. "My son sent that," he said quietly. It was not an explanation. It was something else, the kind of statement a person makes when they are trying to hold something together by saying it out loud. Marcus had not moved from his spot in the pharmacy aisle. He was gripping the handle of his basket with one hand and Bravo's leash with the other. And he was watching Walter Briggs, the way he had once watched a section of road outside Ramadi that looked exactly right and was therefore exactly wrong. The check sat on the counter between them like a small, precise verdict. Tyler looked at it. Walter looked at it. The woman behind Walter looked at her watch again. The man in the polo shirt made a sound in his throat that was not quite a word and not quite a sigh, but was designed to communicate both. Marcus stood still in the pharmacy aisle and felt a cold, specific weight settle into his chest. Not anger, yet something quieter and more corrosive. The feeling of watching something wrong happen in slow motion with your hands at your sides. Bravo had not moved. The dog was still fixed on the front of the store with that locked, deliberate attention, his broad chest expanding and contracting in slow, measured breaths. His nostrils were working, not the eager casting sweep of a dog chasing a smell, but the focused, rapid micro-sampling that Marcus had learned to recognize as signal processing. Something in the breathing patterns of the man at Register 3 had tripped a wire in the dog's training. In the field, Bravo had been taught to read the physiological state of the humans around him. The shallow, arrhythmic respiration of fear. The ragged cadence of someone in physical distress. Walter Briggs was breathing in short, controlled intervals, the way a man breathes when he is concentrating very hard on not showing something. Bravo knew. He was waiting. Walter reached finally into the other deep pocket of his slacks. Not the cardigan, the slacks, the pocket where a man keeps something that matters more than a wallet. And he produced a small, rectangular box covered in faded blue velvet. The hinges made a soft, dry squeak as he opened it. What lay inside was a silver star medal. The ribbon was frayed and discolored, the red and white stripes gone soft with age, but the star itself still caught the light, with the particular unambiguous gravity of something made to last. Walter set the open box on the counter beside the expired check and the presidential letter. "This is silver," he said. "Real silver. The citation is in the envelope. Department of the Navy, 1969. It's worth considerably more than $15. Tyler leaned forward, his gum stilled, for the first time since Marcus had walked in. He looked at the medal with the careful, uncertain expression of someone encountering something they recognize as significant without knowing exactly why. "Sir," he said, and his voice had lost some of its flatness, replaced by something younger and less certain. "I can't take this. My manager would. I'm not allowed to take anything that's not legal tender." "It is not jewelry," Walter said. His tone had shifted, not louder but denser, the way iron sounds different from aluminum when you tap it. It is a silver star from the Department of the Navy. I earned it in Kien Hoa Province, Republic of Vietnam in 1968. I am asking you to hold it as collateral until I return with the remainder." In the silence that followed, Bravo moved. He did not lunge. He did not bark. He crossed the distance from Marcus's side to the register counter in a slow, deliberate walk, the leash going taut in Marcus's hand, and then going slack as Marcus, without entirely deciding to let 2 steps of slack into the line. The dog placed both front paws on the edge of the conveyor belt with the careful, considered weight of an animal that understood precisely what it was doing. He looked at the open blue velvet box. His nose worked once, twice, and then he went still, his amber eyes fixed on the silver star with an attention that was so focused, so unmistakably purposeful, that the woman behind Walter stopped looking at her watch. The man in the polo shirt stopped making sounds in his throat. Tyler straightened up slowly, his gum forgotten between his back teeth. For a moment, 5 seconds, maybe 6, the entire checkout lane existed in a bubble of strange, suspended quiet, anchored by a dog standing with his paws on the counter, bearing witness to a medal that had crossed the Mekong Delta and 50 years of American history to end up in a supermarket in Rockford, Illinois. Then a woman 3 places back in line raised her phone. She did it quietly, without announcement. The screen tilted at the low, careful angle of someone trying not to be noticed. Marcus saw her do it. He did not stop her. He was no longer thinking about ibuprofen. Marcus did not make the decision to move. The decision made itself the way certain decisions do when the body understands something before the conscious mind has finished arguing about it. He was at the register before he'd fully registered, leaving the pharmacy aisle, his boots silent on the linoleum. Bravo dropping back to a heel position beside him with the fluid, practiced ease of a dog that had spent years reading its handler's body language. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out his wallet, and removed a $20 bill, the largest he had. He set it on the scanner with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. "Ring it through," he said to Tyler. His voice was quiet and flat, the register of a man accustomed to being listened to, without needing to raise it. Tyler blinked. He looked at the 20, then at Marcus, at the faded ink on his forearms, at the set of his jaw at Bravo. Sitting at parade, rest beside him, and something in the teenager's calculus shifted. He took the bill, hit a sequence of buttons, and the receipt machine began its mechanical chatter. Walter Briggs had not turned around. He stood at the counter, with both hands resting on the edge of the belt, the blue velvet box still open in front of him, his shoulders carrying a particular tension, not the tension of anger, but the worst tension of a man bracing against something he doesn't know how to refuse. He snapped the box shut. His jaw worked once tightly. He gathered the envelope and the billfold, and without looking at anyone, transferred his groceries into the plastic bags Tyler had set on the counter, moving with the jerky, deliberate efficiency of a man who needed to be somewhere else immediately. He turned not to Marcus, but toward the exit, his eyes fixed on the middle distance, his face carrying the dark, burning color of a man who has just had something taken from him he didn't offer. "I didn't ask for that," he said. Not loudly, not to anyone in particular. A statement of fact delivered to the floor. Then he walked. Cane and bad knee and 3 bags of groceries, and the last shred of something he was working very hard to keep intact, out through the automatic doors and into the blast of the afternoon. Marcus stood at the register for a moment. The receipt curled out of the machine. Tyler was looking at him with an expression Marcus had seen on younger men in other contexts. Not quite awe, not quite confusion, the face of someone trying to recalibrate. "He comes in every Tuesday," Tyler said. He said it quietly, like a confession. "Every Tuesday for the last I don't know, long as I've been here. He always counts exact change." He paused. Today was the first time he couldn't. Marcus looked at him. Not the look he gave civilians who said things he disagreed with. A different look appraising, and then something that wasn't quite patience but was adjacent to it. "Next time you see it happen," Marcus said, "call your manager. Tell him a customer needs assistance. You're not the last person in the chain. You're the first." Tyler opened his mouth and then closed it. He looked at the 20 in the register drawer. He nodded once, small and deliberate, in the way of someone storing something away. Marcus took his receipt, tossed another bill on the counter for his own items, and walked out into the light. The heat outside was aggressive and specific, the kind of Midwest summer afternoon that made the air itself feel like something to be pushed through. The asphalt of the parking lot radiated warmth upward in visible waves. Marcus squinted against the light and found Walter Briggs immediately 50 yards out, moving with the slow, labored determination of a man who had decided on a direction and was not going to be deterred from it by the structural limitations of his body. He had a wire grocery cart, the foldable kind with a single wheel that had locked at some point, and now scraped and shrieked against the pavement with every rotation. A sound like a bird in distress. The cart caught on a seam in the asphalt. Walter stopped, adjusted his grip on the cane with one hand, shoved the cart with the other. It caught again. He shoved it again. The bags shifted. He stood still for a moment in the middle of the parking lot, one hand on the cart, the other on the cane, surrounded by the shining indifference of oversized SUVs rolling past him in both directions. Bravo made a sound, not a whine. Something lower and more deliberate, a single vocalization from the back of his throat, barely audible, that was less a request than a statement. Marcus looked down at him. The dog was already oriented toward Walter the leash, a gentle diagonal tension in Marcus's hand. "Yeah," Marcus said. "I see it." They crossed the lot. When they were 10 feet out, Walter stopped pushing the cart. He didn't turn around, but his posture changed. His spine straightened, his shoulders drew back, and his grip on the cane handle tightened until the knuckles shifted color. He was a man preparing to be handled, and preparing to resist it. "I told you," he said to the air in front of him. His voice was rough, with something that was not quite anger and not quite exhaustion, and was probably both. "I don't take charity. I settle my accounts." "It wasn't charity," Marcus said. He stopped a few feet away and kept his voice at its natural register, undecorated, direct. He had learned early that veterans of Walter's generation received softness as condescension. "You dropped property on the counter. I moved the line along. I wanted my coffee." A pause. Walter turned around. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, hazed at the edges with cataracts, but they were sharp in the center, in the way of a man who had spent decades reading terrain and people. He looked at Marcus's haircut, at the ink on his forearms, at the way he stood, weight balanced, hands loose, the unconscious geometry of someone who had spent years making their body a reliable instrument. Then his gaze dropped to Bravo. The dog had moved without instruction, crossing the remaining distance between them and coming to stand at Walter's left side. The side of the bad knee, the side of the labored lean. He pressed the length of his body gently against the outside of Walter's calf, warm and solid and unhurried, and lifted his muzzle to touch the back of Walter's trembling hand with his nose. The old man's breath caught. It was small, a single involuntary hitch, barely audible over the traffic noise, but Marcus heard it. Something in Walter's face shifted like a knot coming slightly loose. His fingers, slowly, curled into the thick fur at the back of Bravo's neck. "Good dog," he said so quietly it was nearly only breath. He looked back at Marcus. "Frank," he said, and then caught himself a shadow crossing his face. "Walter. Walter Briggs. Navy. Marcus Webb. Marines. Ramadi. 05. Walter nodded once. The economy of men who don't require elaboration. Mekong Delta, he said. Kien Hoa, 68. He looked down at Bravo, who had not moved. Long time ago. I saw what you had in the box, Marcus said. Walter's jaw tightened. You shouldn't have. You didn't do anything wrong. I panicked, Walter said, the word coming out like something bitten off. He started walking again slowly, and Marcus fell into step beside him, matching his pace exactly. And Bravo moved with Walter on the left side, as naturally as if he had always been there. The locked wheel of the cart, screaming its single note against the pavement, the three of them making their slow, unhurried way toward Lakeview Arms. It took 30 minutes to walk 4 blocks. Marcus did not rush it. He kept his stride to Walter's, and Bravo kept his body pressed gently to Walter's left side with the patient, steady warmth of an animal that understood its job. Walter talked in the fragmented, non-linear way of someone who had not spoken at length to another person, in some time sentences that started and stopped, observations that were actually memories, facts offered without context, because he had forgotten or perhaps never realized that context was required for a listener. The VA had made a processing error. His pension had been routed to a deceased account clerical mistake, they said. Ohio office, they said. 6 to 8 weeks to resolve, they said. Property taxes had come due. His wife, Carol, had been on supplemental oxygen for the last 2 years of her life. The concentrator rental had run on autopay from a joint account that he had not thought to close, and that had now been charged for 14 months of equipment he no longer needed and could not afford to have returned. He had 3 final notice envelopes on his kitchen table. He had not opened the one from the VA office that had arrived 3 months ago because experience had taught him that official envelopes from government offices contained either neutral information or information that required him to do something, and he did not currently have the capacity to do either. He had a son named Danny. He said this once near the end of the walk, in a voice stripped of inflection. Danny had left in 2014 after an argument about money, the specific ugly kind of argument that is nominally about money and actually about everything money stands in for. The last communication between them was a check for $200, mailed 3 weeks after the argument, with no note. Walter had looked at it for 3 weeks, without depositing it. Then he had written a check of his own same amount, $200, back to Danny's address with no note, because he had decided that cashing it would mean accepting an apology that had not been made, and he was not willing to do that. He kept the original. Then Carol had gotten sick. Walter carried the check with the presidential letter, the only 2 things from his previous life that he still moved from pocket to pocket when he changed clothes, a habit. So automatic, he had nearly forgotten the reason for it. Lakeview Arms was a 4-story brick building wedged between a coin laundry and a vacant lot 2 blocks from the on-ramp to Interstate 90. The lobby smelled of stale cigarette smoke, boiled vegetables, and the particular damp organic smell of drywall absorbing moisture it would never fully release. The elevator was out of service. Walter navigated the stairs one at a time, right foot first cane, planted on each tread 3 full seconds per step, and Marcus carried the grocery bags without being asked and without commenting on carrying them, which was the correct way to do it. The apartment was 3C. Walter's hand shook on the key twice before the lock turned. Inside, a single room, organized around absence. A recliner facing a small television. A kitchen table with 3 envelopes stacked at one corner and a box of store-brand crackers at the other. Against the far wall, a hospital bed, still made with institutional precision, its rails folded down, its thin pillow still holding the faint impression of a head. A single photograph on the narrow shelf above the television. A woman in her 50s, dark-haired, squinting against the sun, somewhere laughing at something just out of frame. Bravo walked the perimeter of the room quietly, his nose working at the baseboards and the corners. Then he crossed to the recliner, turned once, and lay down, not at the foot of the chair, but draped across it, his broad chest, settling onto the folded wool cardigan that had been left over the armrest. He closed his eyes. Walter watched the dog for a moment without speaking. That was hers, he said finally, not an accusation. Observation, delivered in the tone of a man who has already processed the grief and now lives on the far side of it where everything is simply true. He knows, Marcus said. He set the groceries on the kitchen counter. He did not ask permission. He began putting them away. And on the table, beneath the box of crackers, a corner of an unopened envelope, was visible VA return address, postmarked 3 months ago. Marcus picked it up. Walter told him to put it down. Marcus opened it anyway. It took him 40 seconds to read. The letter was a notification from the Veterans Benefits Administration, Regional Office, Chicago, Walter Thomas Briggs. SEAL Team 2 was assessed as eligible for an aid and attendance benefit upgrade under Title 38, a supplemental monthly payment for veterans requiring assistance with daily living activities. The benefit was substantial. The application response window was 11 days from the date of the letter, which meant it was now 8 days away. Marcus set the letter on the counter beside the groceries and stood in the kitchen with his hands in his pockets and looked at the water stain on the ceiling above the sink, a brown archipelago of slow, chronic neglect. Walter had fallen asleep in the recliner. It had happened between the moment Marcus turned to read the letter and the moment he turned back, the way exhaustion takes older men sometimes. Fast and total, as if a switch had been thrown. His chin was on his chest, his breathing slow and audible, and Bravo had shifted without waking him. Moving from the cardigan to the floor at the base of the recliner, his large head resting across Walter's slippered feet, anchoring him in place with the gentle, immovable weight of an animal that knew when its job was to stay. Marcus stepped out onto the balcony. It was a narrow strip of rusted iron railing overlooking the alley, and, beyond it, the constant roar of I-90, a river of commuters who had no idea that a man who had held his lieutenant's throat together in the mud of Kien Hoa province was sleeping 3 floors above them in a chair next to an empty hospital bed. He took out his phone. He called Ray Hendricks first. The line rang twice and was answered over the metallic clatter of an auto shop and a country song with too much steel guitar. "Talk to me," Ray Marcus said. "I need a favor." "Still alive," Ray said. "Thought you moved to Montana. What's broke a system?" Marcus said. He looked down at the alley. "I'm standing on the balcony of a frogman's apartment. SEAL Team 2 Mekong Delta, 68. 88 years old. He tried to trade his Silver Star for groceries this afternoon because VA froze his pension on a keystroke error out of Ohio. He's got 3 final notices on his kitchen table and a VA benefit letter he never opened that has an 8-day deadline." The sound of tools stopped. The country song stopped. Hendricks said, "Where Lakeview Arms off the 90. Apartment 3C. I know the building. Give me 45. Bring food," Marcus said. "Real food, already moving." He hung up and called Pete Kowalski. Kowalski picked up on the first ring in the way of a man who slept with his phone face up. "I'm going to text you a name," Marcus said. "Walter Thomas Briggs. 88, any sense?" "Any sense." Address, Rockford. He's got a son, Danny Briggs, who he lost contact with in 2014. The son sent a check from Springfield IL area. "I need you to find him." There was a pause. Keys clicking. "Illinois voter registration is public record," Kowalski said. "Give me 20 minutes for the VA and an hour for the son." "The VA first," Marcus said. "There's a benefit deadline in 8 days on it." Marcus slid the phone into his pocket. and leaned on the railing and looked at the highway below. Inside, through the sliding glass door, he could see Walter still in the recliner chest, rising and falling, in the slow architecture of someone who had finally briefly let their guard all the way down. Bravo had not moved. Ray Hendricks arrived 43 minutes later in a black F-250 that had seen better decades but maintained them with dignity. He came up the stairs with a large cooler in one hand, a canvas bag from a good butcher shop in the other, and Pete Kowalski 2 steps behind him, carrying a manila folder and a laptop bag, and the wire-rimmed glasses of a man who spent his working life navigating systems most people never knew existed. Kowalski was lean and methodical, with the posture of someone who had spent years in communications positions, learning to be invisible and useful in equal measure. He still scanned rooflines and secondary exits when he entered a room which was either a professional reflex or a personal one. At this point, Kowalski had stopped being able to tell the difference. Walter woke when they knocked. His hand went to the cane before his eyes were fully open. Bravo was already on his feet, positioned between the recliner and the door. But he was wagging low, and even a calm, rhythmic sweep, and Walter reading the dog. The way a man reads a weather instrument, slowly set the cane back down. Hendricks was a broad, grease-stained force of nature who had once breached 3 consecutive doors in an active engagement in Mosul, and now mostly argued with his suppliers about casing quality. He did not offer Walter a pitying smile. He stepped in, took in the room in 4 seconds, water stain envelopes, hospital bed photograph, and said, "Sir, Ray Hendricks, Army. This is Kowalski, also Army, which is something we're both trying to move past." Walter blinked. Something that was almost a question crossed his face. Kowalski had already sat down at the kitchen table and opened his laptop. He worked with the focused, unhurried efficiency of a man who had made several phone calls from the parking lot and was now arriving at the conclusion of a process he had started before he walked through the door. He had located a direct supervisor in the VA Regional Office Chicago through the Chief of Staff of the Illinois State Senator, whose constituent services office he had assisted on a data recovery problem 6 months prior. He had not asked nicely. He had used the word congressional oversight 3 times in 4 minutes, which was not technically a threat, but was designed to sound like one. Mr. Briggs, Kowalski said without looking up from his screen, "Your pension was not simply delayed. It was routed to an inactive account marked deceased due to a data entry error in the Columbus Processing Center. I have that in writing from a regional supervisor. The back pay 5 months will be in your account by 0800 tomorrow." He tapped a key. "I also filed the aid and attendance upgrade application this evening using the information in your benefit letter. The response window closes in 3 days. You're in the system." He looked up. "I also left an urgent message with the Winnebago County Assessor's Office regarding the property tax delinquency. Notice they will have it first thing tomorrow. Under Illinois Statute 35 ILCS 20015-165, you qualify for a full disabled veteran property tax exemption. I've already started the formal application, so it's ready to file the moment they confirm receipt." The room was quiet except for the low refrigerator hum and distantly the highway. Walter looked at his hands. He had been looking at them since Kowalski started speaking at the liver spots, and the fine tremor and the thickened knuckle of his right index finger, where a piece of copper-jacketed steel had passed through at an angle in 1968 and been mostly, but not entirely, forgotten. When he looked up, his face had changed, in a way that is not easily described in terms of individual features. It was a structural change. The way a load-bearing wall looks different when the weight on it is finally carefully removed. He drew a breath, and then, without warning and without apology, Walter Briggs, who had clamped a hand on an arterial wound in chest-high delta mud and held it for 3 hours without making a sound, who had buried a wife and a career and the idea of a son, and continued to rise each morning and press his slacks, put his face in both hands and sobbed. It was a single, terrible sound, harsh and broken and real. And then it became something more sustained, his narrow shoulders shaking under the old cardigan. Bravo crossed the room in 3 steps. He did not whine. He did not nudge. He pushed his broad chest between Walter's knees and pressed the full, solid weight of himself against the old man's legs, a living anchor, warm and immovable, and stayed there. Hendricks developed a sudden intense interest in the upper cabinet doors. Kowalski organized papers with great precision. Marcus stood by the kitchen counter and looked at the photograph of Carol on the shelf, and did not look at Walter, and gave him every second of privacy a man in that moment deserves. The shaking stopped after 4 minutes. Walter wiped his face with the back of his sleeve in a single, decisive movement, the way a man puts, but he had been cooking on field equipment in worse conditions, and he made adjustments. The smell of butter hitting a hot cast iron pan moved through the apartment like a correction, covering the mold and the dust and the old coffee grounds with something that was simply and completely good. Kowalski had sorted the 3 final notice envelopes into a priority stack and was on a second phone call, quiet and methodical, at the kitchen table doing what he did. Marcus had cleaned the sink trap with a rusted wrench from under the cabinet, which was not what he had planned to spend his Tuesday doing, but the slow drain had been bothering him since he'd arrived, and the act of fixing something physical was, as always, preferable to sitting with his hands empty. They ate off mismatched plates sitting on folding chairs and the arm of the recliner. Walter ate slowly and steadily, the way a man eats who has been managing scarcity and is now cautiously not managing it for 1 meal. Halfway through, he set his fork down and reached into his pocket and produced the blue velvet box. He set it on the table between the plates without opening it, his hand resting on top of it. "Kien Hoa Province," he said. The table went quiet. Hendricks set down his knife. "Delta mud is different from regular mud," Walter said. He was not looking at anyone. "It has a smell, copper, and vegetation, rotting slow in standing water. You sink to mid-thigh in places, and it holds you like it wants to keep you. Boots come off if you're not careful. We were extracting a recon element that had been compromised, moving on foot down a canal tributary, and we took fire from the east bank." He touched the box with 1 finger. Lieutenant Carver took a round through the right side of his neck. Carotid, partially, not clean, not a kill shot, but enough. He dropped in the water. I got to him. He paused. I don't know why I got to him before anyone else. I wasn't faster. I wasn't braver. I think I just happened to be facing the right direction at the wrong moment, and my body moved before my brain had any say in it. He was quiet for a moment. I held pressure on the wound for 3 hours. We couldn't move too much fire. He was conscious for most of it. We talked. He had a daughter in Pensacola, just turned 4. Her name was Louise. He looked at the medal box. He bled out on the medevac. 40 minutes out over the delta. I felt the pressure change under my hand. He stopped. They gave me the star for it, and I hated it. I hated it because it was a reward for failing, for not being fast enough or skilled enough or lucky enough to keep a man alive who had a 4-year-old daughter named Louise. Marcus said, "You kept him for 3 hours. I lost him. You gave him 3 hours in the mud with somebody who wasn't going to leave him. That's not failure. That's the whole job." Walter looked at him across the table. Whatever argument he had been prepared to make did not quite arrive. Hendricks had found the Tribune article on his phone, the quiet teacher of Southside Chicago Tribune. March 1987, and he read one passage aloud. Walter Briggs, retired Navy SEAL, had spent 15 years teaching wilderness, survival, first aid, and navigation to teenagers in underserved neighborhoods on Chicago's South Side pro bono. No organizational affiliation, no grant funding. He stopped coming when Carol got sick. He had never mentioned it to anyone. Marcus said, "The metal doesn't mean anything. The man carrying it does." Walter was quiet for a long time. Then he picked up the box and pushed it across the table toward Marcus. "Keep it safe for me," he said, "until the bank clears in the morning." Marcus took it. He put it in his jacket pocket, against his chest. It was heavier than he expected. It always was. Hendricks and Kowalski left around 10 Hendricks, with a list of things to follow up on, and Kowalski already on his phone before he reached the stairs. Marcus was awake before 6. He had slept on Walter's couch 3 hours, which was 2 more than he usually managed in an unfamiliar space, and he lay in the pre-dawn dark, listening to Bravo breathe on the floor beside him and to the slow, steady sound of Walter in the recliner and to the distant bass note of the highway that never stopped. His phone had 47 notifications. He did not look at them until 6:15, when the light outside the single window went from black to the specific blue-gray of an Illinois summer morning before the heat reasserted itself. When he did look, the number had become 112. The clip was everywhere, shot from a low angle at the end of the checkout lane, slightly shaky, phone camera quality, the color a little blown out by the fluorescent lights, but clear enough. You could see Bravo's broad back as he placed his front paws on the edge of the conveyor belt. You could see the open blue velvet box on the counter. You could see Walter's profile, the cardigan, the cane, the slight tremor in his hands. The dog and the old man, and the silver star, and the ordinary cruelty of a Tuesday afternoon in a discount grocery store in the middle of America. The caption read, "Times dog stands guard as veteran tries to trade silver star for groceries, Valley Discount Grocery, Rockford, IL." It had 2.1 million views. Marcus set the phone face down on the couch cushion and sat with it for a moment. Bravo put his chin on Marcus's knee. At 7:20, someone knocked at the door. Marcus opened it. Pete Kowalski stood in the hallway with his laptop bag. Behind him stood a man Marcus had not seen before. Mid-40s, broad through the shoulders, wearing a work shirt with an electrical contractor's logo above the breast pocket, the fabric bearing the specific wrinkle of clothes slept in during a long drive. He had Walter's jaw and Walter's pale eyes, and he looked like a man who had driven through the night and then sat in a parking lot until the sun came up, talking himself into and out of the same decision multiple times, and had finally arrived at the only one he could live with. Danny Briggs had seen the video at 1:17 in the morning in a motel room in Springfield, IL. He had recognized his father's face, older, diminished, but unmistakably his father's before the video had finished loading. He had been on I-90 North by 1:45. Marcus stepped back from the door without a word. Danny walked into the apartment. Walter heard his footsteps, a specific weight, a specific cadence, the way a man carries himself, that doesn't change between 24 and 44, and turned in the recliner. They looked at each other across the length of the room, 10 seconds of silence that contained 10 years of things neither of them had found a way to say. Then Danny crossed the room in 3 steps and put his arms around his father's shoulders, careful of the frailty, his face against the old mustard cardigan. And Walter's hands came up slowly and gripped the back of his son's work shirt and held on with a strength that had not yet left him. Bravo lay down between the two of them, the warm weight of his flank against both their feet. He closed his eyes. He was done. At 8:32, someone else knocked. Tyler stood in the hallway in his civilian clothes jeans and a plain white t-shirt, his Valley Discount name tag conspicuously absent, holding a brown paper bag from a coffee shop 2 blocks over. He had found the address through Kowalski, who had sent it without being asked, because Kowalski sent things people needed before they knew to ask for them. The good kind. Single origin whole bean. He had recognized the store in the video. He had recognized the dog and the old man. He had called in to swap his shift. "I looked it up," he said to Walter, who was watching him from the recliner with the measured, unhurried patience of a man who had decided to let the moment arrive at its own pace. "The silver star. What it's for?" He paused. "I didn't know." "Nobody told you," Walter said. "Not an absolution. A fact. They should have," Tyler said. He held out the bag. "I know it doesn't. I just thought." "Come in," Walter said. "Danny can show you how to use the good burner on that stove." Marcus was in the hallway when Tyler went inside. He stood with one shoulder against the doorframe, the blue velvet box in his jacket pocket against his chest, and watched through the open door, Tyler at the stove with Danny talking over his shoulder, Kowalski at the table with his laptop, Hendricks reading the Tribune article on his phone again like a man who needed to read something true. Bravo between Walter's feet. Walter's hand moving slowly through the thick fur at the back of the dog's neck. Marcus looked down at Bravo. "You started this," he said quietly. Bravo looked up at him. His amber eyes were calm and complete. The eyes of an animal that had located exactly what it was looking for and was satisfied. He wagged once slowly and put his head back down. The highway below kept moving. The morning kept opening. And Marcus Webb, who had not been looking forward to anything in longer than he could precisely remember, went inside to have a cup of coffee. If this story stayed with you, drop a like and subscribe so the next one finds you. Tell me in the comments which moment hit hardest and where in the world are you reading this from.